And we're live. Hey, everybody. We're here this evening with Angie Jones, who's going to be talking about features beyond Java 8. Angie is a principal developer advocate at Apple Tool, a Java champion, and the director of Test Automation University. As you can probably guess, she specializes in test automation strategy. Tonight, she's going to be walking us through some features that have been added to the JDK since Java 8. So welcome everybody to the Kansas City Java User Group. Give a shout out to our sponsors. As always, we have VMware Tanzu sponsoring us tonight. And even though we're still virtual, we'd like to give a shout out to YRC Freight, who is our sponsor for our physical location whenever we get back to doing physical in-person meetups again. And now for some news for the month. JDK 14 is on track for release early next month, mid next month, March 16th. Some of the features that are being added are records, and this is going to be the full release. Those are currently in preview. Instance of with, pattern matching with instance of, sealed classes, and several other changes. There's an article linked here. We'll publish the slide so you can review that at your leisure. Releases, we don't have a ton to call out. Spring Boot 2.4 was released. Here's a link to the video for release and what's changed in that. As far as other news, we have a few conferences coming up. I guess the silver lining of COVID is that a lot of conferences have gone remote. So where you might not have had a chance to attend, now there is a chance to get online. JFocus is February 9th. DevNexus, which is a great conference every year, February 17th. And DevOps Days Texas is going to be March 2nd and 3rd. And those links are there if you want to look into those and sign up for them. Next month, we will be joined by Monica Beckwith, who will be talking about garbage collection ergonomics. And that's going to be on the 18th at 5. And if there's anything we miss, feel free to call it out in the YouTube chat, and we'll call it out at the end. If you want to get involved, you can always attend our meetups, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, suggest topics, speakers. When we're back to physical in-person meetups, we always like locations. You can volunteer to speak, follow us on Twitter, or provide us feedback there. All right, and I will turn it over now to Angie.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. I'm Angie Jones. I love Java. I'm a principal developer advocate, Java champion, all the things, right? I teach free courses at Test Automation University, including Java programming course. If you know anyone who needs like core Java 101, send them my way. Selenium WebDriver with Java, visual testing with Java, and a couple of others as well. So you can say I'm a bit of a Java fan. Now, while Java is still the leading programming language, right, it's gotten a bad rep over the years. And some of the biggest gripes I've heard are Java's too verbose. Meaning, yes, we have to write a lot of code to do some of the most basic things, yeah? And another one I hear is that the language is not evolving fast enough. So the releases of Java 7, 8, and 9 were all 3 years apart, which is almost a lifetime in software development time, right? But the powers that be, they've heard us loud and clear, and Java has gotten a much needed makeover. And now new versions of the language are being released every 6 months. So the latest release of Java is version 15. And yet many developers are still using Java 8. With so many new features, I know that it's hard to keep up. So in this talk, I want to demonstrate some of the newer features in Java and how we can take advantage of them. All right, let me cut my phone off. All right. Great. Okay, let's get into it. So we're going to look at some test code for verifying this banking page. And the specific test we'll go over today is just going to make sure that all of the accounts that we see here are actually listed. So here's our test code, and I'm going to walk you through this. Here, we're logging into the application. We get a handle to this accounts overview page, and this is where that table of contents is located. Next, we get a list of the account numbers that are displayed on that page. And then we want to get the expected accounts. So the test data can change. So we're going to actually make a call to an API to get the expected accounts. And this is going to return a list of deserialized account objects. All right. So we want to make a new list, which will only contain the account numbers as strings, as opposed to the entire account object. We're going to loop through the list of account objects, and we're going to add the account number from each account into our list of expected accounts. Finally, we compare both lists, make sure every account for this customer is actually shown on the site. All right. So this test was written in Java 8. So we're going to go through it. We're going to see how we can modernize it using some of the latest features in Java. So we're going to start here with the declaration of the accounts overview page. As you can see here, we're following Java conventions, right? We're using good names for both our class and our object. However, many times, as we see here, these two names end up being the same thing, which is redundant. It takes, makes a lot of typing stuff we don't want to do. So in version 10, Java introduced type inference for local variables. And what this means is that instead of explicitly declaring the object or the variable's type, we can instead use this keyword var. And Java will infer what the type is based on what's being assigned to this. Okay. This is my favorite. I started off with the best. This is my favorite new feature in Java because I write a lot of test code. And in test code, we always have these long class names for our page models. And now we no longer need to type all of that out. Now, before you get carried away and start using var everywhere, let me explain the rules and also give you some tips. All right. So this does not make Java a dynamically typed language like JavaScript or like Python. The type is still there. It's just inferred from the right-hand side of the statement, which means you can only use var if you're actually initializing the variable. Otherwise, Java won't be able to infer what its type is, right? That makes sense. Also, it only works for local variables. So you can use it inside of methods, loops, decision structures, but you cannot use this for global variables, even if you're initializing them. Okay. While local variable type inference can be used within the body of local constructs, it cannot be used in the headers of methods or constructors. And this is because whoever's calling you, they need to know the data type of the arguments that they need to send to you, right? Okay, so those are the rules. Now I want to get into some of the guidelines. Now, given this variable name and this method name, I have no idea what the inferred type of X would be. Sure, Java knows, of course. But me as the reader, I can't easily tell what this is. And so this makes it really difficult to work with this variable, right? You should always use good variable names, but it's even more important if you're going to use var. Now, once you get started with this, you're going to love it, but please don't overdo it. For example, using var here, this doesn't do you any favors, right? Var is 3 letters, int is 3 letters. All you're doing is adding ambiguity here when you don't have to. Just type int, okay? All right, so I've updated our test method to use vars. So I'm using var here, and the inferred type is very clear to me as the reader because of the variable name that I chose. But here I changed the variable name from actual accounts to actual accounts IDs list so that it's clear. This is a list and it's holding the account IDs. Now, I thought I had a pretty good name before, and I probably did. Actual accounts was a fine name, right? But it had that additional context of, the list being there. And so without that, I'm losing a bit of context. So that's what I meant about you have to be really careful how you name your variables if you're going to use var. All right. For this one, I also changed the name from accounts to accounts list. So it's clear. It's a list holding account objects. Here, I changed the name to be more representative. I also explicitly defined the data type of the array list on the right-hand side of this statement, right? If I didn't use this diamond operator to indicate that this is a list of strings, then it would be inferred as a list of objects, which that's okay in most cases. However, it could get you in trouble down the road. For example, if I want to get one of the elements from that list, use a dot operator on it to get some of the methods from string class, I would not have access to that, right? Because what was inferred was a list of objects. So I would only have access to the methods of the object class. That's why I needed that. Okay. And then here I'm using var inside of a for loop just to show you that it can be done. Okay. All right. Let's see what else we can modernize. Let's look inside of this get accounts method. Now, remember, this is the table. We're getting all of those values in the first column labeled account. And here's the code to do so. We see here, it finds all of the account sales, and these are web element objects. And then it creates a new list to hold just the text of the web element object. So this is a list of strings. And to populate that list, we loop through each of the elements from line 3. We get their text, and then we add them to our new list on line 6. Notice this method needs 2 lists and a loop, right? There's a more modern approach to do this in Java by using functional programming style. Now, this approach was actually added in Java 8, but I don't see it used much in test code, so I wanted to highlight it, all right? This is much more streamlined, of course, right? Here we still call find elements to get the list of web elements, but we don't need to store those. Instead, we turn them into a string, from which we can do some cool functional programming, right? For example, we can map, use this map function to take those web elements and map them into whatever is passed into here. So here we're saying, get the text from these web elements and then store them into a list, which we then return. All right. Now, here's an alternative way to write that map call. Notice in the top example, line 5 uses a shortcut or syntactic sugar, but in the bottom line, bottom example, line 3 uses the fully spelled out approach with the lambda arrows. Okay. Now we can do this same thing in our test method. So instead of using a to list in a for loop, I use a stream, map what I need, put it all into a single list. All right, great. Now it's a good practice to break up these chained method calls where each method call is on a new line, right? It's really tempting, I know, to do this big, powerful call all on one line because it's like, wow, look at my wicked one-liner, yeah? But it makes it harder to read your code, right? And it makes it harder to debug and the process what's actually going on there. So it's a good practice. Break it up. Each call on a separate line, okay? All right, let's look at what's new with streams after Java 8. So Java 9 introduces a couple of new methods to stream that makes it a little bit more efficient. One of those methods is called take while. So let's say I have this code which gets the list of accounts and then it uses the take while method on this stream of accounts. Within this take while method, you pass in a condition. This condition is also known as a predicate. Okay. And this is saying to go through this list of accounts and accept all of the ones that have a type of checking until you get to one that does not have this type. So here are all of the accounts stored in the accounts list, and notice there are 11 of them. And when we say take while type is checking, we end up with a list of 3 accounts. And as you can see, it's the first 3 accounts from the accounts list. But when it got to that 4th account, the type was savings. So the stream ended, even though there were additional checking accounts in that list. We're done as soon as we get someone that's not what we asked for. Okay. So Java 9 also introduced drop while, which does the opposite of take while. So for this one, we're saying drop the accounts of type checking until you get to one that's not. All right. So instead of take, we're dropping them. So with the 11 accounts here, we see first 3 are checking. 4th is savings. 5th through 9th checking. 10th is savings. The last one is checking. So question, pop quiz. How many accounts do you think will be collected here in the checking accounts list? Go ahead and type it out. And let's see if we can get some answers on the screen. Can we do that? Okay. That's a question. I'm gonna hit you with your questions later. Are we guessing?
Yes, sorry.
Billy?
Hey, yeah, Brandon is having some trouble with his Wi-Fi, so I jumped on. So, okay, right. We got 1, and we got...
Somebody says 1, somebody says 8.
Yep.
Another 8.
Yep.
Okay. Is that it? Are those all the guesses?
I think so far.
All right. All right. Let me get a little water and I'm gonna tell y'all again.
We have a none.
Ooh, I like it. All right, I'm ready to answer, Billy.
All right.
All right. So if you said 8, you are correct. This method dropped the first 3 accounts because they matched the predicate, right? And then it stopped the stream once it got to savings because savings does not match the predicate. So all of the other accounts are collected and stored into the list. All right. So it dropped the first 3 and then everything else was collected. Now, all of those accounts couldn't fit on the last slide. So here's the full list of drop while account type is checking. All right, great. Okay, so you might be thinking like, why on earth would I want to use take while or drop while, right? The examples that I showed you were a bit of a brain tease because the lists weren't sorted. So the results were indeterministic. However, if you sort the collection first, as we're doing here, it makes a lot more sense. And notice I'm using this comparator to specify which property I want this object sorted by, okay? Now, given the sorted list, we see it collects all of the checking accounts, and this actually makes more sense. Likewise for drop while. Okay. So a common question that I get is, well, what's the difference between like take while and filter, for example? Because both of these, right, use a predicate to narrow a string. The difference is that filter operation looks through the entire collection and gathers all of the elements that match the predicate, whereas take while short circuits this process by stopping the operation once it encounters an element that doesn't match the predicate. So that makes take while faster. Okay. All right. Let's see what else we can modernize. How about we go inside of this get customer ID method? So this method is holding our test data. And based on the name on the account, it's returning the account ID. So this is using switch statements. And notice we have to declare the variable, and then we specify each case we want to handle. And inside of the case, we assign the value to ID. And then we must follow that assignment by a break statement to prevent fall through into the next cases, right? Which would override the variable. And everyone here probably has a horror story about how fall through failed them, right? All right. So not only is this a lot of boilerplate code, it's also risky. Like I said, if you forget one of those break statements, this is going to return the wrong ID. So you get yourself a bug there. In Java 12, switch expressions were introduced. So now you can use switch to directly assign a value to a variable. So notice here, we're using switch on the right-hand side of the statement to initialize the variable. And the case statement doesn't need a colon in switch expressions, but instead it uses an arrow. And this is saying if the name is John, then assign 12212 to the variable ID. Notice I don't need a break statement, right? There's no fall through in switch expressions. Woo! I can even simplify this a bit more by removing the assignment here and just returning the result of the switch expression, okay? Now, using the lambda style arrows, that's one way to assign the value, but you can also use another approach. You can use the colon that we're used to, but if you do so, you have to follow that with the word yield followed by a value that you're yielding back, okay? Now, I'll explain more about this in a moment. Now, this is a bit more verbose, right? I don't use yield like this. I'll show you when I use yield, but I just prefer to use the arrow when it's a simple case like this, all right? You can also specify more than one case. So notice here, we're saying if the customer name is John or Demo, which is his last name, then the ID is 12212. So this makes up for the removal of fall through from switch expressions because you can indicate all the cases delimited by a comma, right? Now, I don't hate fall through. I don't want y'all to think I hate it, but it has bitten me before. So that's why this is good. And, you know, I can be more intentional about when I do want to use something like a fall through by using these commas here. All right. Now, you can also do more than just assign values. For example, here we're using the lambda style arrow, but we're following it by a set of curly braces to indicate we want to do more here. All right. So inside of the body of this case, we add more statements like this one, but the last line of the case must yield a value to be returned. This is where that yield comes into play. All right. So like I said, without this, if you don't have to do additional information, you're just doing simple assignments, you hit that arrow, value is assigned. When you want to do more, maybe you have to do a little bit of calculation before you have the value that you want to assign, right? That's what this yield word is for. That it's for yielding the value. Basically, do whatever you want, but you have to give us something because we have to assign something to the variable, right? So that's when you use yield. All right, let's talk about the rules. So you need to use the arrows or the colon yield. You can't like mix and match this using both, right? So line 3 would actually give you a compilation error because it's a different kind of case from the first one, right? You can use yield with the arrows, but only in the events like the case that I just showed you using the curly braces to execute multiple statements within a case, all right? You can use any of the cases to throw an exception. So, of course, in this case, no value is being returned for ID because the entire flow is interrupted by the exception. Okay, so this is not a replacement of the switch statement. It's an addition to the language. meaning you can still use switch statements, and in some cases, that might be the more favorable option. As a rule of thumb, use expressions when you're using the switch to assign a value. Use statements when you're not using switch to assign values, but instead simply to invoke statements. Okay? All right, let's go back to our test. So we're going to go inside of this get accounts method, which is an API call. So this method is making a get call to all of the accounts, to get all of the accounts for the specified customer. And then it's deserializing the response into an array of account objects. All right. So let's look at the response for this call. Notice here, we have an array of these account objects. Each account has an ID, a customer ID, a type, a balance, right? So I have this Pojo class that has nothing but these fields, as well as getters and setters. For any of you who have created Pojos, which are plain old Java objects, meaning all they have are fields and getter and setter methods. For those who've done this, you know, this is tedious. It's not a fun task to do. Many people have moved to using the Lombok external library, for example, so they don't have to write all of this boilerplate code. But in Java 14, a new construct was introduced called records. This is a record, much shorter, right? Notice here, instead of using the word class, we use the word record. Also, as opposed to opening this with a curly brace, we use parentheses to declare the fields. So you specify the fields and their data types in this comma delimited list, and then you close it with a closing paren and a set of curly braces. And that's it. You don't need to make any getters or setters. You don't need to override the inherited methods of equals and hash code and toString. No, all of that is just done for you, and it's done quite nicely. However, if you just want to override anything or maybe add something new within the record, you can definitely do that within those curly braces. So before I had them closed up, just open those bad boys up, put whatever you want inside of the record, okay? But you got to follow these rules. So records can be instantiated just like classes. Account is the name of our record, and we use the new keyword and call the constructor, passing in all of the values. So just like we would do with any other object. The fields of a record are final though, right? So there are no set methods generated for records. Of course, like I said, you can open up those curly braces. You can do whatever you want. So you can try to add a setter there, but I don't really see a good reason to do that since the fields are final and it can't be modified anyway. You do have accessor methods though. However, they don't start with the word get like we're used to. Instead, the accessor method name is the same as the field name. So notice the account.balance call here as opposed to account.getBalance, right? Since records are final, they cannot inherit from other classes or records. Attempting to use the extends clause in a record declaration is going to result in a compilation error, okay? Records can, however, implement interfaces. So just like classes, records use the implements keyword in their declaration to specify their intent. And the methods can be implemented within the record's curly braces. So for example, here we have account interface, and then we have the account record. And I use the implements here to say that this record is going to implement that interface. So this is legal. Now, records were released as a preview feature in Java 14, which was released in March 2020. And what that means is it's not yet a permanent feature of the language. It's just available for us developers to play around with, offer feedback. Based on that feedback, the implementation can change. So I say all of that to say, don't use this in production code just yet. However, it will be a permanent feature in the next release, which is Java 16, and that comes out in March. Because it's a preview feature, if you start playing around with it right now, which I highly encourage you to do, then that could mean that support from external libraries may not be available just yet. For example, when I was playing around with this, I needed to use the Jackson library, which is used to deserialize that JSON response into a record. However, it wasn't supported yet. It was just first released, and it was released as a preview feature, so it wasn't available in the Jackson library just yet. So I needed to work around this by explicitly binding each of these fields to its respective JSON property. I believe records is now supported in Jackson. If not fully, they are definitely working on it. I saw some issues in the project around it, so should be ready. Okay. Next, I want to show you text blocks. So we're going to continue on with the API. And what if instead of calling the API, we just wanted to mock the data right there in the API util class? To represent this whole thing as a string would be very tedious, right? We need to escape all of the fields because they're already in quotation marks. We need to add new line characters for each line break, and we need to add the plus signs for each line. So this is ugly. It's ugly to read. It's ugly to write. Fortunately, text blocks was introduced. So text blocks, they allow you to use 3 quotation marks to open and close a big block of text. And notice you don't need to escape anything. The individual quotation marks are still there on the fields. The line breaks are respected. We don't need those ugly plus signs. I mean, this is beautiful. This is beautiful. Text blocks were introduced in Java 13 as a preview feature. We got a second preview in Java 14, which was the release before now. And I'm happy to announce that records have become a permanent feature in the latest release, Java 15, which came out this past September. So let's give a round of applause to those who implemented this. We welcome text blocks to the language. They were much needed. All right, let's look at some rules and some guidelines about text blocks. You cannot include the entire text block on the same line. All right. You'll get a compilation error like you see on this first line. Now, this is a small amount of text. You don't need a text block for this, right? I could have used just regular quotation marks, but I didn't want a big block of text. And, I got to fit all this stuff on one slide, people. So that's why I use this for an example. But if you try to put it all on one line, you're going to get a compilation error. So you have to have a new line after the opening quotes, like in the second example here. Now, this is legal, but this is not preferred. This doesn't look great, right? The preferred way is to have both the opening and the closing quotes aligned, and then have the big block of text right there in the middle, okay? One more thing I want to show you in that API class. So let's say that we didn't want the entire response, but we wanted to just return like a hard-coded list of expected account IDs, right? The old way of doing this would be to use arrays.asList. However, in Java 9, this of method was introduced for all entities in the collection framework. So lists, maps, sets, etc. Right? This one seems like a small addition, but I've actually been enjoying this. And I think the reason it's that it's more natural. Before, it took a cognitive effort to recall, like, which class do I use to make a quick list, right? Is it array? Is it arrays, plural? Like, which one is it? Now, I want a list. I say list out of. I want a map. I call mapped out of. Nice and straightforward. And speaking of maps, populating maps used to require a separate method call for each item that we wanted to add to the collection. Now you can define a map all with one line of code. Ooh, right. The parameters here are key followed by value. And you see here we have 3 entries in this one line. Now, this is me showing off because that's what we do as developers. You know, I want to show a wicked one-liner. That's what we like to do. But in real life, I would actually put each of the key value pairs on individual lines, right? Just so that it's really clear, no one gets confused, easy to read, right? All right. But if you want your wicked one-liner, nobody else is going to read your code, go ahead. I'm not going to tell anybody. Okay. So one more thing to note about using that of method. It creates collections that are immutable. And what this means is that the collection cannot be changed by adding, removing, or sorting it later, right? So only use this when your collection won't require any changes later on in the program. Okay, so there you have it. These are a few of my favorite new features from recent versions of Java. I've been using them in different projects. I find them quite useful, even for test code. Okay, what questions can I answer?
Hey, Angie. Yeah, that was a great presentation. Yeah, we do have a few questions. Let me see if I can go up to them. Okay, so how does take while handle null?
What do you mean null?
Like if there's like I guess if you're going through a list.
If the list is null?
I guess maybe that's from Random Guy. If you could maybe type out maybe what you mean. I'm guessing a null value within.
Yeah, I'm thinking like in the collection you have one of the entries as null. I have not dealt with that, so I'm just going to tell you based on my expertise and not my experience, right? So I would assume that would stop the stream, right? Because that doesn't match the comparator, and that's the condition. If not the comparator, the predicate. If you don't match the predicate, stop the stream. That's the rule. So does null match the predicate? I'm assuming that would be false, and then it stops.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense for that. And let's see, we had a few other questions. So this was kind of had a bit of a discussion back and forth, but I was kind of let you kind of answer it. Like the difference between take while and filter, is there a performance difference? And there's a couple of other comments about it.
Okay. Random guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you probably asked this right before I spoke on that slide. Yeah. So this is a question I get like all the time. Yeah, the difference is there is a performance difference, and take while is faster because it's not going through the entire list. Filter is going to go through every item in that list to grab what matches the predicate, whereas take while is going to short circuit that. It's going to stop when it gets to something that does not match that predicate. So it's going to be faster.
Okay, great. And let's see. I thought we had another question in here. Oh, also for this is going back to the switch expression. And someone was asking what happens if you have 2 inputs to a given case. Will it be or and for all the inputs?
2 inputs.
So I think from reading it, I don't think it's possible where you can have like in the top of the switch putting 2 arguments.
Like when I had John, demo.
Yeah.
That's an or, right? So if it's John or if it was demo, then assign this value. So think of it like a way to handle the fall throughs that we have in switch statements, right? So if you think about switch statements, it's going to find the case, and then without that fall through, it's going to go to whatever other case 2. Well, maybe that's not a good example because even if it doesn't match the case, it's going to still fall through. So think of it as a better implementation for fall through where you can say, no. If it's either or of these cases, meaning an or, then I want you to assign this value.
Okay. Just another question from a random guy. So which version of Java did list of and map of get introduced?
9.
I think I did have one question. When you were talking about records, you were mentioning how like you could override some like existing from I think you had toString as your example. Aren't you able to also add like any kind of other method, like a completely, just like, calculate, area or something, right?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
you
okay.
you can implement anything that you're inheriting.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also add new functionality there. So exactly that. If you want to add some kind of calculate method or something like that, totally fine.
Cool. Yeah. I couldn't quite remember if that was something they were going to add or not. So
yeah. And records, the idea behind it, the motivation is, sometimes we just need these simple constructs that only have the getters and setters, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, given that your question makes a lot of sense. Well, if I wanted to expand it, can I? Yes, you can. But if you start getting into things where you need to like change state of this object, then you need to move to just a regular class in that case, right? Because you can't change the state of any of the fields within a record. So records are ideally when you just need that quick construct, right? I love them for like serializing and deserializing stuff for like APIs. So requests, responses, I just want kind of boom, boom. Those are great. Records are great for that. If you have something more complex, you want to do all of these things, and then you're like beating on your desk saying, why can't I do this? Why can't I extend from this class and all of that? You're using records wrong. You're trying to get records to do something that classes already do, right? So just use a regular class in those cases.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one of the things I'm kind of looking forward to in the Java 16 or just a post Java 8 world is going to use, because like how often do we have to like just go through just so much typing just to have like a light little Pojo that we for like just like passing it in that it's just being serialized. So
yeah, exactly.
Another kind of question from Brandon about records. Is there a way to implement something similar to parameter validation to a record?
So there was someone who is like playing around in there was something. I just saw something, maybe like today-ish I saw, where there was a way, and I haven't done this personally, but there was like a way that you could add like, it wasn't in the, like you can add additional constructors and stuff like that, but they were doing like validation of those fields right there. Just like you would do, with your regular class or whatever. So the answer is yes, there is a way. I don't think it's anything complicated or non-intuitive to do. I saw it today, but I don't remember where I saw that. So I can't put my hand on it right now. But I saw someone like actually doing that in their code.
Yeah, I hate when that happens. Like, wait, I saw it somewhere. Like, some tweet that like it's like exactly that or something. You had to like scan through it. Do you have a link to this presentation?
Yeah. Go to slides.com/Angie Jones. And I'll have a list of all my talks. You'll see this one kind of up at the top.
Okay, great. Yeah. You also get to send that to me. I'll put that into the description of this video so people can also get to it easily that way as well. I know this makes me also like fanboying over a little bit of some of the new features coming in Java. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, given our strong testing backgrounds, that text blocks is going to be so nice. Like, I know there's been times with like XML, JSON, HTML, where it was like the most painful experience ever just to write out even the most simple of constructs, just of all the tabs and all of that and everything. And I know I would definitely be really like, I was so excited when I saw that coming up.
It is not hard to please a Java developer,
I know.
Like, it's something that simple is just like, brilliant piece of art.
Exactly.
Look at this. But for real, I had to sit back and just look at it like, oh, that's beautiful. Look at that. That's so pretty, you know? Yeah. I'm very excited about that feature as well, Billy.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Is there any other questions that you have for Angie? And we'll just give a couple moments, just because I know this stream here for us runs like just a couple minutes ahead of the actual live stream. Okay, I'm guessing maybe no more questions. So great. So thank you everyone for attending, and I'll be sure to get like a link sent out to Angie's. It wasn't one of our presentations, but maybe if you know like a link to it. Do you know of like any examples for a sealed class, or have you not worked with those?
Yeah. Go to Beldong's site. This is again like me making up stuff. Like I think I saw it there. I think I saw an example there. He's usually like pretty on top of it. Go there.
Yeah, I think I found what you're talking about. Here, I'll post that into the. Yeah, thanks for that reference. Yeah. So yeah, there for random guy. Yeah, you can check out an example of sealed classes there. So
nice.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for presenting today, Angie. And yeah, I'm definitely super looking forward to beyond Java 8. There's so much coming, and so
yeah.
Even this.
Yes. All right. Thank you all so much. It was fun.
Bye.